A hotel heiress offered me her entire mountain lodge, deed and all. If I could rewire the electrical system her 3 licensed contractors had already walked away from. She made that offer standing in my driveway in a coat that cost more than my truck, looking at me the way people look at a gas station bathroom. They use it because they have to. They don't think about it afterward. I rewired it. The part that saved the whole job cost me $11 at the hardware store on Route 9. But I'll tell you right now, that $11 breaker is not the part of this story that matters. Not even close. What matters is what I did with the money she owed me. And what happened 3 months later when the hardest woman I have ever stood in a room with saw something taped to the dashboard of my work van and couldn't finish her own sentence. My name is Sam Pruett. I'm 44 years old. I run a one-man electrical contracting business out of a white van with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I keep meaning to fix and never do. My license is current, my tools are good, and my shop rate is fair. Which in this business means I stay busy enough to keep the lights on, but not so busy that I ever stop worrying about whether I'll stay busy enough to keep the lights on. That particular wheel never really stops turning, and the reason it cannot stop turning, the reason I pick up every call and drive out to every job, and never once in 10 years said no to work I wasn't sure I could handle, is my son. His name is Theo. He's 9 years old, and he is the single best thing I have ever done with my time on this earth. And I say that understanding it is a low bar given some of my choices in my 20s. I need to tell you about Theo before any of the rest of this makes any sense. Theo was born with what the doctors call a tethered spinal cord. It's one of those conditions that sounds like something out of a medical textbook, which it is, and which means very little until a pediatric neurosurgeon sits across a table from you and explains in careful, measured words that your 7-year-old son is going to need surgery, and that the surgery is the kind that comes with a number attached to it that makes the walls of the room feel like they're leaning in. For a while we managed it, stretches and physical therapy, and a watchful eye, and otherwise a pretty normal life, school, little league. Him handing me tools in the garage on Saturday mornings and telling me with complete authority that I was doing it wrong. And then it started progressing, the way the doctors had always told me it eventually might. And we found ourselves in that small cold office with the bad lighting again, and the word surgery stopped being a future thing and became a right now thing. I want to back up and tell you the part I don't usually tell people, because it matters for understanding why I am the way I am. Theo's mother, Dana, left when Theo was 5. I am not going to say ugly things about her here, because my son is going to be old enough to find this one day, and I will not have him hear his father tear his mother apart. What I will say, and I'll say it as plainly and gently as I know how, is that when the full weight of Theo's diagnosis finally settled onto us, the years of appointments and the uncertainty and the fear that sits in your stomach at 3 in the morning that no amount of rational thinking ever fully quiets. She found that she could not carry it. Some people discover that about themselves, and they discover it at the worst possible time. She was there one evening and gone by the next morning, and it has been the 2 of us ever since. 4 years. Me and Theo against a thing that is considerably larger than the both of us. So when people ask me why I take every job that comes in, why I drove 2 hours in February to rewire a pump house for $180, why I said yes to an impossible job in the mountains that 3 other contractors had already walked away from. Well, his name is Theo. He needs surgery that I cannot, on what a one-man electrical contractor earns in a year, begin to afford. That is the engine underneath everything I'm about to tell you. Keep him in mind, because I never once stopped having him in mind. Now let me tell you about the lodge. The call came in on a Wednesday afternoon in October from a property manager named Doug who sounded like a man who had been making difficult phone calls all day and was not enjoying it. He told me there was a historic lodge up in the Berkshires, a big one, guest capacity of 40, had been in the same family for 3 generations. The electrical system had started failing, not in one dramatic way, in the quiet, creeping, intermittent way that's actually harder to chase down than a clean outage. Lights dimming on one wing for no clear reason. A circuit breaker in the kitchen, tripping twice a week on no particular schedule. The heating system cycling off and refusing to restart until someone went down to the mechanical room and reset it by hand. 3 licensed contractors had looked at it. The first one had replaced the main panel, several $1,000s. Didn't fix it. The second had rewired 2 circuits in the east wing and replaced 3 breakers. More money. Didn't fix it. The third had done something that I still find genuinely baffling, which is that he had looked at the whole situation, quoted the family $85,000 to gut the entire electrical system back to the studs and start over, and then recommended they consider whether the building was worth saving at all. $85,000. I wrote that number down on the back of an envelope on my passenger seat and looked at it for a minute before I pulled out of my driveway. When I got there, the owner was not present. That was fine. I had the paperwork from all 3 previous contractors, which Doug had emailed me, and which I had printed out and read twice the night before, and which told me a great deal about what those 3 men had done and a very important thing about what none of them had done, which was spend serious uninterrupted time in the building listening to it. A building will tell you what's wrong with it. That sounds like something a man says to Soundwise in a documentary. I mean it practically. Old wiring in an old structure behaves differently at different temperatures, under different loads, at different times of day. You cannot walk in, plug in a meter, read a number, and bill for the answer. You have to be there. You have to be patient. You have to let it show you the thing it's been trying to show 3 other people who were too busy, or too expensive, or too convinced they already knew the answer to actually look. I spent 2 full days in that lodge. I had Theo set up in the caretaker's cottage with his tablet and his homework, and strict instructions to stay out of the main building, and he lasted about 45 minutes before he appeared at my elbow, wanting to know if the knob and tube wiring sing in the ceiling was original, and whether I thought the building was haunted. I traced the symptoms back methodically. The dimming on one wing, the kitchen breaker, the heating system. On their own, they pointed in 3 different directions. Together, once I started following them not to where the codes pointed but to where the actual wire ran, they converged on one thing. A junction box behind a section of original plaster in the mechanical room, in a wall that nobody had opened because there was no obvious reason to open it. The junction box had an old aluminum to copper splice in it that had been oxidizing for probably 15 years. Aluminum and copper expand and contract at different rates, over time, over thousands of heat cycles. That connection had worked itself loose to the point where it was making contact intermittently, and when it lost contact, it was backfeeding just enough resistance through the system to dim that wing, stress that kitchen circuit, and confuse the heating controller into faulting out. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. The fix was a proper antioxidant compound, a new listed connector, and one $11 ALCU-rated breaker to replace the wrong-rated one somebody had put in there a decade ago. The repair itself took me less than an hour once I found it. The 2 days of patient, boring, unglamorous searching were why I found it, and 3 other contractors didn't. I tested it thoroughly. I ran every circuit under load. I cycled the heating system a dozen times. I sat in that mechanical room for 3 hours waiting to see if anything misbehaved, which is genuinely how I spend a significant portion of my professional life, waiting in mechanical rooms to see if things misbehave. And when I was satisfied, I called Doug and told him the lodge was ready, and asked him to let the owner know. What I did not know, because Doug had not mentioned it and I had not thought to ask, was who exactly the owner was. She arrived the following afternoon. Her name was Victoria Sloan, and if you follow commercial real estate or hospitality industry news, that name might land for you, because she had built a portfolio of boutique mountain properties across New England that had been written up in enough magazines that even I had heard of it, and I do not read hospitality industry news. Everything about her was precise and expensive, and completely intentional, the kind of put-together that takes an enormous amount of money to make look effortless. She walked into the lodge, and then out to where I was writing up my invoice in the parking area, and she took one slow look at my van, at the dent in the quarter panel, at me in my work jacket with the peeling embroidery that used to say Pruett Electric before the P fell off, and I never replaced it. She said without any particular warmth, "So you're the one Doug found." I said yes, ma'am, and I told her what I'd found and what I'd done, in plain language, the way I always do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me, in a tone of voice that was not hostile exactly but was at the temperature of a January morning in the Berkshires, that she found it difficult to believe that a problem 3 professional contractors had failed to solve over the course of 4 months had been resolved in 2 days by a one-man operation driving a van with a damaged quarter panel. She said she would of course have the work independently verified before she released payment. She said it the way you'd say it to someone you were already fairly certain had done something wrong. I told her that was completely reasonable and I'd welcome it. And then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "Or we settle this another way. You're so confident in your work. I'm told this property has been appraised at just over $1 million too. I will make you the following offer. You drive back up here in 30 days. If this lodge is running the way you say it will be, no dimming, no tripped breakers, no heating faults, I will pay your invoice and I will add a bonus equal to 10 times your rate. If it fails in any way, you eat the invoice, refund your deposit, and I will put in writing that your company is not qualified to work on historic structures." I want to be honest with you about the moment she said that. The smart part of me knew it was designed to make me back down. She was standing there with all of that certainty, all of that money, all of that practiced authority, and she was pointing it directly at me, at my dented van, at the peeling embroidery, at my entire livelihood, and she was confident. I could see it clearly. That I would blink, that I would stammer something about needing to think it over, and find a way to retreat gracefully. Theo was sitting in the caretaker's cottage 70 yards behind me at that moment. I had driven 2 hours in October to be here. I had spent 2 days doing work that 3 other men had been unwilling or unable to do. I had found the thing. I had fixed the thing. I knew what I knew. I put out my hand and I said, "Deal." She shook it like she was closing a real estate transaction, which for her I suppose she was. The month that followed was one of the longer months of my life, and not because I had any doubt about the lodge. I didn't. I knew what I'd fixed and I knew it was fixed. It was long because Theo had a bad stretch right in the middle of it. A week where the symptoms the doctors had been monitoring got noticeably worse, and we spent 3 days at Boston Children's doing tests, and I sat in a waiting room chair doing the math I do every night, the math that never comes out even no matter how I work it. And I let myself, for the first time, think about what that bonus would actually mean. Not as a prize, as a number, as a thing that could sit between my son and the worst version of what might happen next. I drove back up to the lodge on the 31st day. Everything ran perfectly. Doug met me there and walked the whole building with me. Every circuit, every breaker, the heating system cycling clean every time. No dimming, no faults, nothing. I called Victoria Sloan and told her I was ready whenever she'd like to come do her own walkthrough. She came the following morning. She brought her own electrician. He went through the whole building independently, which she had warned me she'd do, and which I had told her I was fine with. I stood outside in the cold and drank bad coffee from a gas station cup and waited, and about 90 minutes later he came out and told her, in terms that were professional and neutral and left no room for interpretation, that the repair was correct, complete, and had addressed the root cause of the reported failures. The silence that followed, that lasted about 10 seconds. She paid my invoice. She wrote the bonus check personally rather than having her property manager do it, which I noticed. She handed both to me across the hood of my van, and she said, stiffly, "Your diagnosis was accurate." I said thank you. I didn't gloat. I didn't do the thing I had every right to do, which was remind her in some detail what she had been willing to put in writing about my qualifications 30 days earlier. I was too tired, honestly. Too wrung out from the weeks of worry about Theo to spend any of what was left on satisfaction, and I think that's why I said what I said next instead of just taking the checks and leaving. I said, "I'm going to put this toward my son's surgery. Just so you know what it's for." I don't know why I said it. I hadn't planned to, it just came out. The way things do when you're too tired to manage what you let out of your mouth. She looked at me. I said it plainly. Theo's spinal condition, the surgery he needed, what it cost. Why a one-man electrical contractor drives 2 hours in February to rewire a pump house for $180. All of it. I kept it short because I was tired and because I do not like asking people for things, and this felt uncomfortably close to that. Even though I wasn't asking for anything, I was just explaining where I was going to drive after I left her parking lot. When I finished talking, she was looking past me at the van, not at me. At the van, she said. Whose drawing is that? I turned around. The passenger side window was facing us, and taped to the inside of it, where it had been for going on 2 years, was a drawing Theo had made when he was 7. Crayon on a piece of notebook paper. 2 stick figures. The tall one in the blue jacket was clearly meant to be me, because he was holding something Theo always drew as a lightning bolt, which was his way of drawing the electrical tester I carry on my belt. The small one next to me was Theo, and above both of them, in the careful uneven letters of a 7-year-old who has just learned to write in cursive and is very proud of it, Dad fixes things. Victoria Sloane stood in that parking lot in her beautiful coat, and she looked at that drawing for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "How old is he?" I said. 9 now. He made that when he was 7. Another silence. Then she said, "I'd like you to come inside for a minute. What she told me in the next hour I will not share in full, because parts of it were told in a confidence I intend to keep. But I'll tell you the shape of it." She had grown up with nothing. I mean that in the specific, concrete American way. Not romantic poverty, but the grinding, humiliating kind, the kind with an eviction notice on the door and a mother working 2 jobs and still not making it. She had gotten out through scholarships and sheer ferocious will and 20 years of being twice as prepared and half as forgiving as anyone else in every room she walked into. She had built her portfolio property by property, deal by deal, and she had done it by learning very early that softness got you hurt and that the only reliable currency was competence and leverage. And somewhere in the building of all that, she had become someone who walked into a parking lot and looked at a working man's van and filed him away before he'd said a word. She did not say she was sorry, exactly. I don't think that word comes easily to her, and I respected that she didn't reach for it when she didn't mean it. What she said was that she had looked at that drawing in the window and felt something shift, and she had realized, standing there, that she had spent the better part of a month being certain that the man with the dented van was going to fail, and the entire time what he had actually been doing was trying to pay for his kid's surgery. She asked me, carefully, if I would be willing to let her make a call. I said, "That depends on the call." She said she sat on the board of a foundation that funded pediatric surgical cases that fell into the gap. Too much income to qualify for Medicaid, not enough to absorb the costs insurance wouldn't cover. She said Theo might qualify. She said she wasn't promising anything. She was asking if I would be willing to let her make a call. I sat there for a moment. I said yes. I want to be careful here, because this next part is the truest part. And I don't want to make it sound like a transaction, because it wasn't. What happened over the following months was not Victoria Sloane writing a check, because she understood without me ever saying it that I would not have accepted a check. What she did was open a door I could not have opened from my side. She made a call, and the foundation reviewed Theo's case, and they covered what our insurance wouldn't, and in February, 4 months after I'd driven up to that lodge with my tools and my $11 breaker, Theo had his surgery at Boston Children's. He came through it. He came through it clean. I need to say that slowly, because there are still mornings I wake up and have to remind myself that I get to say it. My son came through his surgery, and his spine is what it's supposed to be, and he is going to run and play and grow up without the progression that had been waiting for him at the end of that road. I'm going to say that one more time. He is going to grow up. Victoria kept showing up after that, which I had not expected. She came to Boston the day of the surgery, sat in the waiting room with me for 6 hours without once pulling out her phone to work, which I later found out was unprecedented in the experience of everyone who knew her. She brought Theo a book about the history of electricity when he was in recovery, which he received with the kind of genuine enthusiasm that 9-year-olds reserve for things adults bring them that are accidentally exactly right. She came to the house a few times after he was home. At first, Theo was shy of her, the way he gets with people he hasn't categorized yet. Then he asked her, with the directness that 9-year-olds deploy without mercy, how much money she had and whether she had a helicopter. She told him she did not have a helicopter, and he should not believe everything he read online. He thought about this, and then told her he had a drone with a broken propeller, and asked if she knew how to fix it. She said she did not, but she knew someone who did. I came in from the garage 20 minutes later to find her sitting at the kitchen table watching my son explain the circuitry of a toy drone to her with a level of patience that I was not expecting, and which, I found out later, she had not expected from herself either. There is a version of how this next part goes that I am not going to write, because it's not the version that actually happened, and because the true version is harder to explain and more worth the effort. I did not fall for Victoria Sloan because she had money. I spent 2 months being looked at like a problem she was already composing the negative review for. Money was not what fixed that, and she did not come back to my kitchen table because I was some salt-of-the-earth working man with simple values that her wealth had somehow lost sight of. That kind of story is sentimental in a way that would have made her leave, and honestly would have made me uncomfortable too. What actually happened was slower and more ordinary and harder to summarize. She kept coming back, and the reason she kept coming back was that for the first time in longer than she could pinpoint, she was in a house where nobody wanted anything from her. Not her connections. Not her name. Not what she could do. Theo wanted to know about her helicopter, which she didn't have, and once that was established, he wanted to talk about drones and electrical systems and whether a squirrel could theoretically power a small LED if you convinced it to run on a wheel. I wanted her to sit down and eat dinner if she was going to stand in my kitchen. That was the whole offer. Sit down. Eat dinner. You don't have to be impressive here. It took her a while to know what to do with that. And I let her in slowly and carefully, because I watched, week after week, what happens to a very guarded person when they're in a room where no one needs anything from them. And it turns out what happens is they gradually remember how to breathe. She told me, once, on the porch after Theo had gone to bed, that the night of the surgery had been the first time in years she had sat somewhere without working because she genuinely could not think about anything other than whether that kid in the operating room was going to be okay. She said it like it surprised her. I said, yeah. That's what he does to people. We got married 14 months later, in October, up at the lodge, which felt right in a way that I didn't try to explain to anyone, and most people seemed to understand anyway. The weather was good. Theo was the ring bearer and took the job with a seriousness that bordered on professional. He wore a tie that he had selected himself and which did not match anything else present and which he was very pleased with. The woman who had once looked at my dented van and filed me away before I'd spoken a single word stood up at the front of that lodge and married me. And the year after that, she sat across the kitchen table from my son every Sunday morning and did the crossword puzzle with him. And she lost, consistently, because he has a memory for obscure vocabulary and which he deploys without mercy. And which, here is the thing I come back to, late at night, more than anything else in this whole story. Victoria Sloan had more than I will ever have. More money, more access, more rooms that opened when she walked toward them, and she was alone in a way that none of it touched. And the thing that finally got through all of that, not the foundation, not the surgery, not any single grand gesture, was a crayon drawing taped to the inside of a work van window. 2 stick figures and a lightning bolt and a kid's careful handwriting. Dad fixes things. She told me once, not long after we were married, that she had stood in that parking lot looking at that drawing and had thought about what her own 7-year-old self would have made a drawing of, and what it would have said above it, and that when she had tried to picture it, she couldn't come up with anything, and that absence had hit her somewhere she hadn't expected. I think about that a lot. I think about how many people are walking around in armor they built for good reasons, armor that worked when they needed it, and that now they can't figure out how to take off because they've been wearing it so long they've forgotten there was ever a version of them that didn't need it. I think there's no. I fixed a lodge with an $11 part because I was willing to be patient and boring and humble and do the work none of the other guys wanted to do. I did not do it because I was special. I did it because I needed to. Because Theo needed me to. And because somewhere down in the walls of that building was the truth of what was actually wrong, and the truth was findable if you were just willing to slow down and look. Everything else followed from that. All of it. So I want to ask you something before you go, and I want you to actually think about it. Have you ever written someone off completely? Decided who they were from the dent in their van, from the peeling jacket, from the neighborhood they work in, and later found out you were wrong about all of it, Or have you been on the other side of that? Have you been the person somebody filed away before you could speak? Tell me down in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I mean that. And if this story sat with you tonight, if you believe the way I've come to believe it, write down in the place where I can't argue myself out of it, that the truth of a person is almost never the thing on the surface, then do me a favor. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop a like so someone else can find their way here, and I'll see you in the next one.